Problems have solutions, predicaments have managed outcomes. There's nothing we there's nothing I'm going to be able to do to change this. I can try and advocate for it, but there's things I can do in my own personal life to be resilient against this. And part of that is comes from coming out of the system.
Welcome to the Rejecting Average podcast, where we challenge the status quo and push back against modern complacency. Join us, Chris and Brett Betcher, as we talk health, leading our families, and living intentionally, because average just isn't good enough. So last time we talked to Steve Penny about his personal story, the Air Force, beating his Crohn's disease naturally, the life in the RV, homeschooling his kids, and why faith is really the foundation of everything. And if you haven't listened to that one, I would definitely encourage you to go back and listen to that. But really, everything with Steve he's built was built off of the freedom to live life. It comes back to understanding money, kind of what is money, and why it's different than what most people understand. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So Steve was one of the first people that Brett and I followed back in 2020 when we started kind of questioning everything from the money system, the healthcare system, really a lot of the things that we were being told. And honestly, his content on the financial system was really a gateway for us to view things very, very differently. So Steve, I want to welcome you back in and really to where this all started.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me back. Loved our last conversation and excited to be back again. Thanks.
Yeah, so let's dive into it. I know this is, I think Chris said, right in your wheelhouse, being able to talk, more on the financial side of things. And yeah, I really want to be able to pick your brain on some of these things. So I guess, starting, I think back in 2020 was very eye-opening for us, as Chris mentioned. And you were one of the first people that, that we followed in that process as we kind of learned more and more about, the system and kind of, what's not working with it and arguably, where it's broken. I guess, who were you following when you kind of got started on this process and kind of started seeing some cracks within the financial system? I mean, who are some names it doesn't even have to be, it could be your, what were you following that, kind of stood out to you and kind of helped guide you in this process?
Yeah, so I guess my eyes became open to how the financial system works going back right around to that 2007, 2008 financial crisis. I just started learning on my own, but then that financial crisis really accelerated my desire to dig in and learn even more. But the book that started it all for me was called The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. Highly recommend that book. I cross paths with people all the time who say the same thing. That's the book that opened my eyes to everything, not just how the financial system works, but even more. We've been kind of lied to about so many things in our history books and even finance and economic classes. But 2020, who was I following around that time? Um, it's kind of evolved for me, and not that the people I don't longer follow anymore. It just you kind of you kind of okay, I get what they're saying, I get their perspective, and then you move on to learn new things from new people. But Peter Schiff was one who really opened my eyes. I think he does a great job of explaining things from a macro perspective, the big picture of how it's all going to unfold. Not that I agree with everything he says or his timing and things, but he was instrumental in kind of waking my eyes, opening my eyes to how the whole system works. I follow Jim Rickards, I follow Chris Martenson, Doomberg. Um, let's see, I follow so many people on Substack, but those are kind of some of the big ones who have opened my eyes from a big macro perspective. David Morgan, I've gotten to be friends with him too, as well. He's really good. Those are just some of the names of people who I follow.
Yeah, and so many of those names definitely kind of resonate with me as well. And there's no shortage of people kind of in the sound money space. But I think for the average person who might be listening in today, we hear a lot about Bitcoin, gold, silver as sound money. I guess would you take a couple minutes and just kind of explain to people what sound money truly is and why it's very different than the fiat that we're kind of trying to save up as far as the dollars and cents that we're so accustomed to?
Yeah, there are, I think, 6 or 7 attributes that money has to have, and I'm not going to name them all now. You could just Google them, because probably it's been too long to just regurgitate them all. But at the end of the day, silver and gold are the only two things, and you can maybe say platinum as well, that meet the definition of true money. Some people might argue Bitcoin as well. So to me, gold and silver are money. Everything else is credit. So our debt-based fiat monetary system right now is all built on debt and credit. And this can blow your mind if you've never heard this before, but most people have no idea how currency is created. There's something called the Mandrake mechanism, and money is actually borrowed into existence. You go back to 1913, that's the inception of the Federal Reserve here in the United States of America. 1913, that changed everything for us because now money is lent into existence by who? By a private banking cartel, otherwise known as the Federal Reserve. The name is deceptive because the Federal Reserve is no more federal than Federal Express. It's a private banking cartel that has the exorbitant privilege of creating money, currency out of thin air, lending it into existence. And who has to pay it back? Well, the taxpayer, and they have to pay it back with interest. It's an exorbitant privilege. It's private owners. And there's always, by definition, more debt in the system than currency units in creation able to service that debt. So it's like mathematically impossible to just pay off the debt because there's always more debt than currency in creation. So more debt has to be created, to be able to service the existing debt that's out there. So it's just a math problem. You could even call it, if you want to be dramatic, and I think there's truth to it, is it's a form of enslavement because it forces people to go work, pay taxes, and a big part of that is interest to this private banking cartel. So people are trading their time, their talent, and their treasures, their time on this earth to service interest that's owed to a private banking cartel, otherwise known as the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, and being able to, you talked about the creature of Jekyll Island earlier, and I would absolutely advocate for kind of digging into that as well because it does tie directly to the creation of the Federal Reserve. And I like to kind of going back to the 2020 moment when we were, the money printer goes burr. You guys have all seen the memes of all of the money, or more so the credit-based system that we exploded back in 2020. That's really what opened my eyes because you start to understand. I'm going to throw one other term out you, like I think it's called the Cantillon Effect of like those closest to the money, to the printer, so to speak, of the creation of this credit, they benefit the most. And the best way I always like to explain it is, if you're struggling to pay your bills and you were given a stimulus check, what are you going to do with that right away? You're going to go buy groceries at Walmart. You're going to go fill up your gas can or your gas tank. And so that money that was just created is now being siphoned immediately back up to the top of the food chain. And those are the same people that are going to be able to access that cheap credit as well. So it's, I think that was kind of the moment that really opened my eyes. And yeah, I guess would love to kind of hear, was there a specific moment in your life where you're like, whoa, like none of this makes sense anymore?
Yeah, I had that moment after reading Creature from Jekyll Island following the 2007, 2008 financial crisis. But yeah, you're right. That COVID crash and the ensuing central planner response was just so far beyond anything we've ever seen before. And guess what? There's going to be another crash. There's going to be another deflationary impulse slash panic. And the response will be even more draconian than what we saw during COVID. And what inflation does when they create currency out of thin air, it's often marketed as helping the small guy. Oh, we're going to send out stimulus checks. Oh, we're going to have this assistance program. Yeah, they get pennies on the dollar, but who it really enriches are the people closest to the money, like you said. So, just as a thought experiment, let's just say they created $1 trillion instantly right now, and it began to disperse throughout the system. Well, inflation by definition is an increase in the currency supply. Rising prices are the symptom. So if you created $1 trillion today, well, the symptom hasn't manifest yet. It hasn't resulted in rising prices. So the beneficiary, the person who gets that currency first, can go spend it before the cost inflation hits. By the time it trickles down to the average person, well, their groceries bill's gone up, their gas bill's gone up, their utilities gone up, and how much of it even trickles down to them? Very little. So inflation is a tax on the lower and middle classes, and it's a subsidy for the upper class and the rich. And we talk about this K-shaped economy where the wealthy are doing just fine. They're getting richer. The rich are getting richer, and the poor are getting poorer. And people blame all kinds of things. Everyone blames, but a lot of the blame is based on political beliefs when really the root of the problem is currency creation and debt monetization and the Federal Reserve system we have. It's such an important thing, and as Ron Paul says, if the people understood this, they would rise up in revolution tomorrow, but so few people understand it. And, rather than try and I've realized a long time ago, we talked about problems have solutions, predicaments have managed outcomes. There's nothing we there's nothing I'm gonna be able to do to change this. I mean, if I could, I would. I can try and advocate for it, but there's things I can do in my own personal life to be, resilient against this, and part of that is comes from coming out of the system as much as we can. And, on our last show, we talked about coming out of the medical establishment system, the education system. Well, you can come out of the financial system too and kind of shield yourself from a lot of these destructive policies.
Yeah, and I I think that's really, I mean, obviously we talk primarily about health and a lot of the things that we do, but there seems to be at least a bit of an awakening going on, a health awakening, but also a bit of a financial awakening where with social media, with so much more information being shared out there, I like to think it seems maybe it's just my the tunnel that I'm in on social media, but there seems to be more and more people at least talking about these things, which can be really positive. I guess I'm curious in your eyes and kind of your experience, going back to when you first had your eyes open to this, but I mean, I think the reaction that you get now is probably drastically different than when you were first talking about some of these ideas. I think more and more people are probably open to hearing this. So I'm kind of curious to hear, when you first started talking about, yeah, sound money and all these things back in, 2006, '07, '08. I mean, what was the reaction at that time from people, whether it's just people, you were having a conversation with locally or obviously, more in the online sphere?
Yeah, largely, no one wanted to hear about it back then, 2008, 2009, 2010, and we did participate in that first silver bull run. First for me, should say, because 2008 silver got down around $12 in the paper price anyway, and then by 2011 it got up to $50. That was the first big run in silver. I just didn't have the knowledge and expertise to know that you got to take profits, at least some profits during those kind of big run ups. But I remember talking about it then, and people's eyes glazed over. Now people are waking up to it. People I haven't talked to in years, based on the price action of silver. They're calling me saying, "Hey, should I buy some silver? Should I buy some gold now? How do I protect myself from all these things you were talking about 15 years ago?" So there is much more of an awakening, and that's definitely a good thing. But it tells me, the powers that be, the central planners, whatever you want to call it, they don't want the public to understand this, but I don't think they can stop it. So I think that raises the risk that they accelerate their timeline for imposing these kind of draconian measures. I think the pace of change is going to accelerate. Um, so just something to think about. But yeah, people are waking up.
Yeah, in some ways, you could kind of view those in power as an increased level of desperation that seems to be going on right now, and as that desperation only increases, I would expect the response to be even more insane. And I think that's kind of what the three of us certainly believe. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but the creation of more and more kind of currency units certainly seems to be part of that. I guess from a practical standpoint, the debt based system in general, in my opinion, is what kind of keeps people under the foot of the planners, so to speak, where it's like, when you're in debt, for us, it was a massive amount of student debt that we had to try to dig ourselves back out of. For others, it might be, a mortgage or credit card payments or whatever that might be. But do you feel like that debt system is intentional and is used to kind of keep people compliant?
Oh, 100%. I won't be able to recall all the details, but I know going back to the early part of the 1900s, the Rockefellers and people like that kind of took over because they donated to these big universities and all these education systems. They got to write the curriculum, and of course, in those curriculums is not included anything about personal finance. Basically, the education system now indoctrinates you from a young age to be institutionalized to you go the traditional path that you're indoctrinated to is not go start a business. In fact, they put all these barriers up to doing that. They want you to go to college, take out all this debt, so now you're kind of enslaved by that college debt, and then you go sit in an office for 50, 60 hours a week. And then if you're lucky, when you're 60, 65 years old, maybe you can retire with some dignity and then go take some vacations and do all the things you wished you could do when you were younger. That's kind of the path they set you on. I think that is intentional for sure because it benefits these big corporations. They need employees. They need, obedient, compliant employees who will come up and show up for 50 hours a week. And do what they're told.
Yeah, we we unpacked that a little bit on a few episodes back, the idea of kind of our experience through traditional schooling and yeah, it's kind of the debt that it ends up putting you in with student loans and really just a lot of the the missing links along the way, whether it's yeah things we need to make sure we're teaching our children at a young age and just being able to yeah create those foundations for finances, because at the end of the day, like yeah, no matter what your goals are, even going back to the your company's slogan with silver chartists and kind of the idea of pursuing life's higher calling via the idea of financial independence or time freedom. And yeah, if we don't have that, you do kind of end up on this hamster wheel where you're chasing that carrot and you're really struggling to kind of break free. So I guess from your perspective, Steve, I mean, what do you kind of see as being like the next, the next stage, or the, call it the end game with, with fiat, with money right now? I know I'm not asking you for a timeline, excuse me, not asking you for a timeline on anything, but I guess what do you expect? What does that end game actually look like for you?
Yeah, this is where akin you have to balance. We have to be realists and I like to think I'm an optimist, but I'm also a realist. So it's hard to be an optimist when you look at the reality of the situation. So there's not really a bright outcome on the path we're on, and problems have solutions, predicaments have managed outcomes. So this is not a problem that has a solution. This debt problem we have here in the United States, it's a predicament that doesn't have a solution. It has a managed outcomes, and none of those managed outcomes are particularly good for the majority of people. So my end game, let's just start with some basic math. We are approaching a point where 100% of tax receipts go to simply consuming interest on the debt. That's imagine the household who all their income comes in has to go just to service the credit card. Obviously, it won't get that far. That's a disastrous scenario we're on. And I don't see anything that can change that trajectory. I mean, the draconian cuts that would have to happen in order to avoid that outcome, the people would never put up for it. The government's not going to tell grandma and grandpa, hey, we got to cut your social security checks. We got to cut all these entitlement spendings. We got to cut military spending. They're not going to do any of that. None of that is even on the table or being talked about. So we have to assume the path we're on is going to result in an inflationary debt spiral because politicians have two choices. They can either default honestly, hey, sorry, we can't make good on all these unfunded contingent liabilities and debt obligations. Can't do it. The math doesn't work. Money's gone. Social Security, yeah, there's no trust fund there. It's a pile of IOUs. So that's one option. Honest default, not going to happen. The only other option is to debase the currency, print currency units to make good on all these obligations in nominal terms. I believe they're going to make good on them nominally, but in real terms, you're not going to be able to buy a fraction of what you could before. So I think inflation is the outcome, big inflation, if not potentially hyperinflation. Now, the question I have in my mind, that's ultimately the end game if nothing happens. But I don't some people say these central planners are stupid. I don't think they're stupid. I think they're evil, but they're incredibly smart. And I think that they're going to introduce some kind of new system. They're going to introduce a new monetary system before we get to that point, before we have runaway hyperinflation. And I don't know exactly what it'll look like, but it'll probably involve a central bank digital currency or something similar to that, which allows them to have more control over every area of your life, where they can track your spending, your political leanings, all these things. Every transaction you ever make will be, on the government ledger, so to speak. So I think that's the direction we're headed. Less freedom, more inflation, um, more of a crunch on the average everyday person, and that's where it's incredibly important to be wise, to have a plan, because just sitting back and being a victim, you can either choose to be a victim of it, or you can start taking steps towards making your financial life more resilient.
Yeah, and again, it can sometimes come across as, I hate to say doomerish, but like people, you'll hear that from people when they hear that like you're interested in sound money and gold, silver, commodities, things like that. And I think it comes down to like understanding. I want to be active in my approach. I'm not going to passively accept what's kind of being bared down on top of us. As the leader of my family, the last thing I'm going to do is put myself in a position where I'm gonna have to accept the terms of somebody else's way to dictate my life, the things that I can do, the way that I can lead my family. And so no different than your health or really any other thing that we talk about on this podcast is you have to be intentional. And by executing on some level of a plan, it puts you in a position where you actually can make choices for yourself. And I think Brett and I would argue that, like, number one, yeah, getting financial security, but even throwing in there, like being a critical thinker, being someone who can, have their health because, if you talked about like, the central bank digital currencies and things like they call it UBI, which is, universal basic income, where you're paying people to basically exist, but not necessarily paying them enough money that they can actually do something with that. And you can turn their money on and off based on, yeah, their social, interactions and things like that. Is I want to be in a position where I don't have to opt into that system, and I can have a choice in the matter, to be able to, exercise my freedom and hopefully be able to kind of be a vessel for the community around us as well. Because if you have enough people that are building wealth and building security outside the system, you give the people around you a choice as well. And I think that that's where, as a society, we're going to have an opportunity to make a difference, regardless of, how evil some of these planners are. And I agree with you. I think there is good and evil. I think we both would agree with that. And you have to recognize that that evil exists to be able to step away or to choose to go in a different direction, both with your lifestyle and even with your finances as well.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you said it so much better than I did. But, I laid out the kind of the doom and gloom case, the negative case. But on the bright side, with the advent of the internet and, all these other ways, I would argue there's never been more possibilities out there for someone who's curious, who's got work ethic, who's entrepreneurial. There are all kinds of things we can do to create either side hustles or, these kind of entrepreneurial pursuits that you can kind of do and give you freedom from being an employee. So there are opportunities out there. You just have to be curious, look for them, and be willing to put in the work, and not give up. I mean, I before Silver Chartist kind of took off, I failed at so many things. I mean, I wanted so bad to break free from the rat race. I tried so many things, and I'd be embarrassed to say some of them, but they failed. But I failed forward, and so there are opportunities out there. So I'm just saying that so I'm not too all negative. There are positives out there as well.
Yeah. And I want to get into, some of those positives here in a little bit and some practical ways. I do have a couple more areas I want to unpack here first. I guess the first thing, and Brett and I were actually just having a conversation about financial advisors the other day. Some of the feedback my dad was getting on his portfolio and things like that. Where do you think most financial advisors get it wrong? Or they just like, I don't think they're lying to their clients. I think there's a lot of things they just don't understand. So they're unwilling to talk about these things with clients.
Yeah, I've been so back and forth on this. So, just to be totally transparent, I don't yet, as of now, have a financial advisor, but I would say maybe where people misunderstand the value of financial advisor, what the value of a financial advisor is not often the value they offer. Most people seek a financial advisor because they want to outperform the market, where if you go back, there's all kinds of studies on this. Over a 20-year period, something like 85, 90% of them underperform just the S&P 500 over a 20-year period. So trying to outperform having a financial advisor is very difficult to do, especially when you account for their fees. So to me, the value of a financial advisor is one with like account structures, tax efficiencies, certain vehicles belong in a Roth, certain belong in a traditional 401k, certain belong in a taxable account. Setting up your tax structure, setting up an inheritance plan for your kids, a trust, things like that. And also, as you get closer to retirement, where the real value of a financial advisor to me is when it comes to withdrawing from your portfolio, when you're living off of your assets someday, having a drawdown strategy is where a good financial advisor can be really valuable. So, full transparency, I plan to have one someday, but right now, I don't necessarily have one or feel like I need one right now.
Yeah, and I'm in the same position as you in that respect. I think there can be a lot of value in kind of removing, some people can be their own worst enemy. And, I think if you recognize like, hey, I'm probably not the person that can step away from the emotion, then you might be better off just allowing somebody else to handle it. And yeah, we're certainly not here to give financial advice on an individual level or anything like that. But I think it's more so just understanding that like a lot of times they're versed in a very specific logic that has worked over the last, let's just call it 25, 30 years in the markets. And there's a bit of a recency bias as a result. So I guess I would love to hear your perspective on that in terms of like, are there people that are potentially not being exposed to some of the sound money opportunities that are out there because of the recency bias and chasing, the tech bubble and things like that that have gone on over the last couple of decades?
Okay, yeah, I see where you're going with that question. Yeah, trying to totally. Financial advisors are not really incentivized to talk about some alternative assets like silver, like gold, like precious metals, or other alternative assets. Number one, because in the financial industry, it's almost okay to be wrong as long as you're wrong with everyone else. So if you missed out on gold, but everyone else missed out on it too, they can tell their clients, "Hey, well, no one really knew about that," you know. So it's kind of okay. Where if they did put their money into, put their clients' money into gold and it didn't work out so well, they're going to lose a lot of business because no one else was doing that. So there is certainly that kind of um, pressure to go with the crowds, go with convention, but also silver and gold stored outside of the banking system, which is how it should be stored, they can't charge an asset under management fee for that. So that's another reason financial advisors typically are not incentivized to put their clients in precious metals. Now there have been more institutions, more financial advisors that are recommending an exposure to gold lately, which is certainly refreshing, but it's still the minority.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right as far as, being able to collect the fees and just the consistency of that. It's almost like something that as a business model they can trust if they feel like, okay, we can perform XYZ in the market. It may not be the best performance, but it's not going to be the worst. And they're able to then continue to collect that fee. I think that's something that again most people need to be aware of. But and I think it's really important to just understand and have those conversations. No different than we talk about advocating for yourself when you're having a conversation with your doctor. I think you need to advocate for yourself when you're having those conversations with a trusted financial advisor as well. Is they're hopefully able to, if this is something you're interested in, um, showcase some potential opportunities for you to get some exposure in your portfolio. So, last one I've got here for you before we get into some practical stuff, Steve, is like, what do you feel like is the biggest lie financially that most Americans believe?
Wow. Okay. I can think of a lot. What is the biggest lie most people believe? Well, I want to give a good answer here. I think it's more of a mindset that consumption brings happiness and contentment when it doesn't. Um, Again, like we said in that last interview we did, I'm not against buying nice things once in a while. I enjoy some fun stuff. My boys and I have these electric bike things we zip around on. We have a lot of fun with those. But often, the satisfaction fades, and then can often be left with buyer's remorse. So I think a lot of people are just conditioned to think in as far as mindset, I need to consume now, where I think there can be a lot more satisfaction and benefit to that delayed gratification and having higher savings rate. Um, where you're not necessarily sacrificing today to save for tomorrow. I think a lot of people maybe do that mental calculus like, oh, if I have a high savings rate, I'm going to have to skimp down too much today where that you can actually find satisfaction in saving for more for tomorrow, and you're not going to miss out on the y- y- the things maybe you could have bought. Those things aren't going to bring you as much satisfaction as maybe you think. Hopefully, that's a good answer. That's the first one that came to mind.
You guys know we're big on keeping things simple. Whole foods first, always. But when it comes to hitting your protein targets on a busy day, sometimes you need a little help. That's where Legion comes in. Grass fed whey protein that my kids think tastes like dessert. And I know exactly what's in it because they third party test all of their products for things like heavy metals. For busy families looking for convenient ways to hit their nutrition goals, it's a great tool to have in your back pocket. Use code B2B for a discount or the link in the description, and you'll receive cash back on all future purchases. I love that. Again, I think we're absolutely kind of indebted to this instant gratification lifestyle that we tend to be tend to have thrown in our face on a day-to-day basis, and we can kind of step out of that consumerism. And I know, you guys are on the road with the RV, with our young family of four. Like, there are sacrifices that need to be made financially to put our family in a position to be able to save and to be able to still enjoy life. And I don't think it has to be one or the other. There's just different ways to be able to still enjoy life that are not tied to, $5,000 family vacations and things like that. And so, I think that's where, we can do both, and find a way to kind of use that financial vehicle to still build true wealth. So I guess, let's transition over to, sober chart here for a few minutes. Go ahead.
Would it be okay? I knew I was going to come up with a better answer for that previous question. Can I give two quick ones?
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Okay. I would say number one is failure to understand the power of compounding. So if you were, for every dollar you save let's say you started saving at the age of 20, by the time you get to retirement at 65, using historical rate of return on the S&P 500. Granted, that's no guarantee of the future, but every $1 turns into about $88 in retirement. So every consumption decision, $1,000, well, that's $88,000 in retirement. Under and doing that cost benefit analysis of, would your future self regret that $1,000 decision you made when you were 20 that's here today and gone tomorrow? So that's one, failure to understand compounding. And then early on, like, if I could go back and do this again, I would have poured money into my Roth IRA. Now, there's income limitations on it. Once you start making over 200 and something combined as a married couple, you can't do it anymore. But that's money that you get no tax benefit now in a Roth, but it grows tax free. It grows tax free. And I love that, because to me, that's like, I give up that tax benefit now, but the government's out of my life. Like, I'm not in a partnership with the government anymore. I get, I'd rather be taxed on the seed and let the harvest grow tax free. So, man, because you can only get so much in that Roth account every year. I think it's like 7,500, somewhere around there, each person per year. But man, I wish I could go back and just stuff that Roth account as much as I could. And a lot of people say, well, I don't want it locked up in retirement until retirement. What's cool about a Roth, and I don't recommend you do this, I don't recommend withdrawing from it, but you can. Let's say you put 7,500 bucks in this year. You can take that money out without penalty. You just can't take out the growth without penalty. So you can have access to that money without penalty. Not advisable to take it out, but Roth, the power of a Roth IRA, really cool strategy. You can do, metals in there. You can do all kinds of things in a Roth IRA.
Yeah, I love that. And even being able to, like, I think you talk sometimes about like automating it too, where, 7,500 bucks sounds like a big number, but for the average person, what is that, like $120 a month, a week, something like, or yeah,
Right.
120 bucks a week. It's like, you go to a nice dinner, that's probably the same cost and maybe you can't do the full 7,500, but if you're, in your 20s and 30s and you can contribute a third of that or half of that, like you said earlier, it just has like massive compounding effects over the course of our lifetime.
Yeah.
So,
Tax
uh,
free.
yeah, exactly. So, you're known as Silver Chartist. That's really kind of the community you've built. And for someone who knows nothing about silver, gold, precious metals, would love to kind of just have you give an overview of why now. Like, why is now the time to be thinking about those as a way to secure your financial future?
Absolutely. So what we're seeing right now may feel like it's new and never been seen before. And I would argue this is the biggest global debt binge in all of history. However, the cycle is not new. What has been will be again. There's nothing new under the sun. And these cycles in history go all the way back to like the book of Genesis. I think it's Genesis 49. It says, and the money failed in Egypt. The money failed. In other words, there was hyperinflation, and gold and silver were used as money. That's the first time gold and silver were used. So going back throughout these cycles, Michael Maloney calls it the 7 stages of empire. We're in those latter stages right now that have repeated time and time again in history. And what's interesting is silver and gold always, 100% of the time, do a full accounting for the expansion of debt-based fiat currency. So these cycles repeat. The governments expand beyond what the tax base can support. They get all involved in all these foreign conflicts and social programs that the tax base can't support that. And every single time, 100% of the time, what they do is they print currency. Now, going back, millennia or even longer, uh, they would debase the silver and gold coins with base metals, copper and lead and zinc and things like that. That's how they would print money. Well, now they can just do it on a computer, add zeros and ones on a computer. But gold and silver always do a full accounting for that expansion of currency supply every single time. They've done it again. And to say this time would be different, I would say is kind of naive because it's never not happened before. Now, could it be different? It's possible, but there's no signs of that. And history is replete with failed attempts to replace silver and gold as money. Silver and gold have been money for thousands of years, and I believe they will be for long into the future, despite governments' repeated attempts to replace that system with something that they can control. So that's my short pitch for why everyone should have some exposure to silver and gold. I will say when I learned all this, I was like all in on silver and gold. And it worked out well because the price was low. But I'm not an advocate for going 100% in because some people can learn all this and say, I'm just going to put all my money in silver and gold. There's other things you could do too. But I think it's wise to have an allocation to physical metals at this juncture, especially where we're at in the cycle.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question is, and I'm glad you talked about kind of the balanced approach and just being able to, not get emotional, whether you're chasing a meme stock or whether you're chasing, the recent, silver run that's going on back in January. It's like it can get highly emotional and you can get over leveraged with anything. And so, yeah, we're not sitting here trying to convince anyone to go all in or making outrageous price targets. I know you're always kind of hands off with that because we can't predict the future exactly. But I guess I would like to kind of get an idea of where you do feel like we are at in this cycle.
Yeah, I think we're in the latter innings. I think I like to look at the 1970s bull market as a parallel to this current bull market. Now, there's a lot of key differences as well, but some of your listeners may recall back in the 1970s, we were on a gold standard until 1971. Before 1971, we were just coming off of the Vietnam War, where what did the government do? They spent all this money that was unbacked. They created all this money to fund the war and other social programs, guns and butter, and all this. And we had to come off the gold standard in 1971. Silver and gold had a big run leading up to 1974. I mean, they just went nuts after coming off that gold standard. But then what happened? We had a blow off peak and they went sideways for 5 years. So I think that's where we're at now. I think we had a big kind of blow off top in January. Silver got to $121. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. We were below 20. So that was a huge move. But I think that we're in a 1974 moment. Now, I don't think it's going to take 5 years of sideways consolidation. I think it's going to be shorter. I think it's going to be more compressed before we have our 1979 moment. In 1979, silver went up 8x in 12 months, just a blow off top, big move. Now, key differences between now and the 1970s is in 1980, Paul Volcker came in and squashed inflation by raising interest rates up towards 20%, I think 18 or 19% or so. He raised interest rates higher than the rate of inflation. That squashed inflation and took the air out of the bubble in silver and gold. It ended that bull market. There's no Paul Volcker this time. In fact, it would be mathematically impossible to do that with a $30 trillion national debt and growing. You can't raise interest rates to 20%. You can't raise them to 10% because pretty soon you're gonna consume all of our tax dollars with just interest on the debt. So their ability to raise interest rates to fight inflation is very limited. Our economy cannot handle interest rates above 4.5, 5% for much long at all. It's just simple math. So that's how it's different from the 1970s. But where we're at now, I think we're in that consolidation period. This is an opportunity to, I think, buy on weakness. Not predicting we get a pullback to 50 in silver, but if that comes to fruition, I think that would be a fantastic place to really kind of buy pretty aggressively. Silver and gold are so volatile, and I dollar cost average just a little bit every month. I buy some every single month for the last almost 20 years now. But every few years, there comes a moment where there's panic and you can get it for, pennies on the dollar. You can get it dirt cheap. And I'm kind of hoping we get another one of those moments here in the next, year or so to really scoop up bargains before the big run. Because ultimately, I think silver's going much, much higher. If you just took an average of the previous two bull markets, 1970s, and then the one that ended in 2011, that gives you north of $10,000 gold, even $15,000 gold. That may sound sensational, but that's just the average of the previous two. So ultimately, I think we're going much higher. I think, the consolidation here could take a little bit longer than many people think, and that's healthy. I welcome that. I hope we get, a little more pullbacks so we can be patient, patiently accumulate. But that's where I think we're at.
Yeah, so many nuggets there. You talked about dollar cost averaging, which for anyone with investing, I think is a great foundational principle. Doesn't really matter what you're jumping into. You don't need to throw all your money at it at one time. It's like just being consistent. And, if you have a specific asset class like gold or silver that you're trying to accumulate, doing it over time, it really does take the guesswork out of it of, throwing 75 bucks or $100 a week at it, whatever that might be. You'll be surprised at how much you can accumulate in relatively short order just by being consistent and not having emotion involved with it. Um, I guess I definitely want to spend some time, talking about the practical side of this here for a few minutes. So, I imagine we have a lot of people that, have never necessarily been introduced to gold and silver or sound money. Let's say you had someone who was a parent who had an extra, 300, $500 a month that they were trying to figure out where to get started. If it was your money, what would you do to get started, and what would that look like?
Sure. Yeah. Let's say it was a family member, my mom, for example. She's like, Steve, what should I do? Well, at first, I would see if she has any high interest debt. That's what I would do with my mom, just so I'm not like giving personal advice. We'll just hypothetically say it's my mom, for example. Yeah, I would say let's work on any high interest debt first, because the average credit card rate is what 24, 25% now. I mean, silver might outperform that, probably will, but man, I'd rather just get rid of that credit card debt first, so that way you're investing from a position of strength. So high interest consumer debt, get rid of that first. And then I would say, yeah, just get a healthy allocation to silver and gold stored outside of the banking system that you can get your hands on, up to, well, whatever's comfortable. But I like the idea of 10 to 20% of my investable assets in physical metal. And that's as an insurance policy against out of control central planners. And then if I'm more aggressive and willing to take on a little bit more risk, I would start with some high quality mining stocks or royalty and streaming plays, just the blue chip ones that I just plan to hold for the duration of the bull market. And I wouldn't get involved in any kind of speculative explorers and developers or anything like that until I've got a really solid foundation and a firm understanding. But the real simple answer is avoid consumer debt, get some access to physical metal as an insurance policy, and then if you want to start playing offense, just one or two really high quality gold and silver stocks. You don't need to go with the high risk ones. If you need them at all, really, most people probably shouldn't even mess with mining stocks if you don't really fully understand it. If you're not prepared to push the sell button when the time comes, because that can be hard to do.
Yeah, I think that's a great foundational thing. I mean, neither one of us want to be in a position here where we're having people take on a lot of leverage just to be able to get exposure. In most cases, stepping outside of the matrix of consumer debt is going to give you the opportunity to make sound decisions. And I think that really is the first piece. I know for me that was about, okay, like I'm going to overcommit myself to paying down student loans, and for the last, call it 5, 6 years. It was basically a mortgage payment to my student loans. But like I realized that there was no way I was ever going to be in a position where I could get to the next step and without being able to unpack that. And so like, yeah, it's not enjoyable. There's major sacrifices that need to be made. But once you step out of that kind of credit, it's freeing. At least that's been my experience of like, there's no greater feeling than being able to like make that last, debt payment and realize like I never have to be under that, under that burden ever again. So I would totally agree with that, and love that that was your first step in this process.
Yeah, some people might argue with that, even especially if it's lower interest rate debt, and say, "Oh man, I can make more return in the market." Well, I would say to the person who doesn't, I would say, try it, get debt free, and if you don't like it, you can go back. No one ever does that, but that would be my kind of pushback. Someone says, "I don't want to get debt free." Well, try it. If you don't like it, you can go back to taking on debt. No one ever does that.
Yeah, and I guess to kind of continue from there, I mean, kind of what does financial freedom actually look like for you? Because I think most people, they may have a little bit of a distorted picture of that, and maybe this looks a little bit different for each person.
It does, yeah, and I think there's different levels to financial independence, and I follow a little bit the FIRE community, and they have these terms like Coast Fi, Barista Fi, Fat Fi. I don't know if you're familiar with any of those terms, but to me, the simple definition is where passive income from your investments can cover your living expenses. To me, that's like the first level of financial independence, and to be honest, I'm not quite there yet. Getting closer and closer, and I'm striving for it. But man, if you can just live off your passive investments, what a level of freedom that gives you. I think back to the times with COVID when I was an airline pilot, right in the very beginning. I'm like, man, do I do something I don't want to do because I need to provide for my family? So getting to that first level of financial independence, passive income covers your basic living expenses. The next level is where the passive income from your investments covers, your current lifestyle. And then the next one would be, where passive income from your investments covers, um, you know, your current lifestyle plus some aspirational goals. So those are kind of like three broad levels. But man, if you can get to that first level where you can cover your basic living expenses, what a weight off your shoulders.
Yeah, and you took this exactly where I wanted to go with the next question of, as you continue to kind of build that financial freedom, it does allow us to pursue those kind of deeper callings that God has drawn us to. And I also think there's something to be said of like, you know, being a better husband, being a better father is directly connected to being able to step out of some of that financial burden. So I guess, do you mind kind of talking about that a little bit? I think you're still muted, Steve.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Yeah, when I first started learning about finances and personal finance, it can be uh, it can be tempting for some with my personality anyway, and I suspect some of your listeners, where okay, I see how it all works now. I see a path to achieving the goal, and I'm just going to go full throttle towards it at the expense of other things. So you kind of got to balance, that path towards financial independence with your other higher priorities. Your relationship with God, your family, being a good parent, a dad, all those things. So for me, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I've done it all perfectly. I've gone, I tend to be kind of extreme in things. So, I went a little bit too far extreme, and my wife was gracious enough to tell me, you got to throttle it back here. We need you over here, present, right here, right now. So striking that balance, I think, is important. But it's important to say that. I wouldn't say that to most people because most of society is way over here. They're like not even thinking about this stuff. They're off just buying new trucks and cars and boats and whatever, getting into debt up to their eyeballs. So they need to be thinking more, hey, how do I rein it in? But for the person who's geared towards, that their eyes are awake and they see that there's a path out of it. Yeah, but don't go too aggressive at the expense of more important things like being present with your family.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really strong point right there where you end up being in a position where the relationship with money starts to be at a higher pillar than your faith and your family and things like that. And if we can keep things in balance, like you said, you still are going to look like you're a little crazy sometimes, because everybody else is so far on the other extreme that if we can pull it back to the middle, you may feel like you're kind of in a company of your own. But like the things that you're building right now with Silver Chartist and the things that you've done over the last few years, it probably does look a little crazy to the average person, but when you live intentionally and you do some of the things that we talk about here with trying to step outside of your comfort zone and lead a life that looks a little bit different than what the rest of the culture is, I would argue there's not a lot of competition here. So I guess I'd love to kind of finish up the conversation talking about that and how it's just when you bet on yourself, you do it on a day to day basis, you're willing to fail, why that does really allow us to really do whatever we want. And it might not be perfect. It might, I'm not going to pretend like it's roses through the whole process, but it just gives us a level of freedom that I think most people are desperately searching for right now.
Yeah, so true. And I remember back in 2016 is when my eyes were open to a new way of thinking, and I was able to overcome some false limiting beliefs. Like the idea of being able to work for myself from a computer at home seemed like that was not even within the realm of possibility. And I went to a conference in 2016, being around other like-minded people, and the conference host, his name's Jerry Robinson, just did I had a mindset shift towards what's possible. And then that was a big turning point in my life because I started moving in that direction. And so it's a process. I don't want to leave anyone who's maybe stuck in that 9 to 5 with the impression that I'm suggesting, because I'm certainly not, that you need to just quit your job and go be an entrepreneur or something like that. Not at all. But I think you can start taking small incremental steps, like even just getting like a small side hustle going. Man, if you can make $100 a month, $200 a month, that feels really good towards escaping the rat race on top of your, your normal 9 to 5 grind that maybe you don't love too much. and you can build on that. And over time, you can find yourself on a path towards breaking free, towards more and more independence. Just having a little bit of financial independence is exponentially better than having none. Even if you don't get all the way there where you can just retire and live off your investments, I mean, that's a high goal. But even if you can get just a fraction of the way there, the weight off your shoulders, um, just releases. If you can be consumer debt free and have some passive income coming in, it makes you feel better about if you lost your job, or if the government tries to make you do something you don't want to do. So just starting down the journey is the hardest part. Getting started is the hardest part.
Yeah, and it's incredibly empowering too to be able to make, I always say like the first dollar you make in a side hustle is the hardest dollar you'll ever earn, and after that it gets easier and easier.
Agreed.
And so yeah, it's like you don't need to replace your income, but you can be learning new skills, you can be connecting with people, building community, and in a way, that potentially opens up brand new doors. I mean, I think for Brett and I, we would never have imagined doing something like this, being able to have a conversation with you 5 years ago when we were just trying to figure out how to make heads or tails of the chaos of the financial system. And now, here we are having this conversation, 5 years later. So yeah, it's been great to learn from you, Steve. It's been great to we appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us here, this afternoon, and look forward to being able to do it again. I guess one last thing. I guess what's next for Steve Penny and Silver Charters?
I don't know. I mean, we just started a new thing where we're creating passive income. We're looking on creating passive income streams with dividends and a really unique strategy, but still focused on silver, uranium, platinum, and gold, but also focused on creating those passive income streams. So really excited about that. And something you just said brought to mind the saying of, often you can accomplish you'll accomplish less than you think you can over the next year, but you can accomplish far more than you ever believe over the next 3, 4, or 5 years. So, just taking those action steps, you can accomplish way more than you think. I've seen that in my own life. I never thought any of this was possible, and it is kind of mind blowing to think where I was 5 years ago, and it sounds like you guys too. Um,
Yeah, you just never really know where, God's going to be able to take you just by showing up every day. And you don't have to have it all figured out. It's just a matter of, betting on yourself, believing that that next door is going to be opened. And yeah, just allowing those pieces of the puzzle to kind of come together. And apologize if there's any screaming in the background right now. I've got a 3-year-old that's not really happy here as we finish up. But Steve, I kind of want to just finish up here then, one more time. Where can people find you? And any final words of wisdom to kind of help people question the system financially, medically, educational, and kind of for someone who doesn't really know where to start.
Yeah, I'm smiling too because I've got a 3-year-old at home too, so I'm not the only one who has these things. I'm sure anyone listening is smiling too because it just shows we're real people, with real families. But yeah, let's see. I kind of forgot your question, but it was for people looking to step outside. What's the kind of the first thing they should do? I'm sorry. I Can you say the question again?
Yeah, absolutely. For anyone who's looking to follow your work or where to find you, kind of just talk a little bit about yourself. Give yourself a little pitch here for a minute, and then I guess any final words for someone who's looking to get started when if they're maybe questioning the system and just trying to figure out where to get started with it.
Sure. Self education often has the highest return on investment. That's one of my favorite sayings. So educating yourself on how things work is so empowering, and it'll allow you to navigate these things with wisdom. So just start educating yourself. Pick up some good personal finance books. And if so many people are mired in consumer debt, and it can be enticing to go after all these strategies, even silver, which I'm a big fan of, or uranium or gold, or creating passive income. I would say kind of put out the fires first, get your head above water, tackle that consumer debt. It can take longer than we often like. It took me years to get out of that kind of mess that I put myself in. But once I did, now I was kind of speculating, investing from a position of strength. So it's nothing fun, nothing kind of super wise to say that, but I think that's a good place to start before going down any kind of any of these strategies we're talking about. But silverchartist.com is the website. It's a fully transparent, over the shoulder service, real time alerts. I show people exactly what I'm doing, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm proud of our track record, but I certainly don't get everything correct. And we have a really awesome community over there as well, silverchartist.com. Thanks so much.
Yeah, and you can check out the link. Brett and I are once again both members over there. Extremely worth the investment. I think it's underpriced, to be honest, Steve. Just I think the value that you give just in your weekly reports. It's an easy listen. I mow the yard, listen to those things, and I just gain a ton of knowledge to kind of reinforce the habits, especially during some really volatile times. So Steve, really, this is exactly why we started this podcast. We've done 2 episodes and covered a ton of ground on, health and faith, family, finances, just unpacking the broken systems and, kind of what it looks like to build a life on our own terms. So really appreciate your time. This is what Rejecting Average is all about. So anything else you want to add here before we wrap it up?
No, man, I think we covered it. I really enjoyed these conversations with you and Brett, and hopefully we get to do it again sometime. But you guys, I can tell. I know you're just getting started with this podcast. This is only a few episodes in. This thing is gonna catch on, and you're tapping into something really special here. And I think people are going to recognize it. So wish you guys the best of luck, and I know it's going to do exceptionally well.
Well, we appreciate it, Steve. It's been a pleasure, and really look forward to being able to do it again. So we thank everybody for listening in to the Rejecting Average podcast here. If you're ready to break the mold and build a life that stands out, subscribe and join the movement. Reject Average, and we'll see you guys next time. Let me ask you this. How much are you paying for health insurance every month? And how much of that is actually going towards keeping you healthy versus lining the insurance company's pockets while you pay high deductibles? That's why Brett and I switched to Crowd Health. It's not insurance. It's a community of healthy people who share each other's medical costs directly by cutting out the middlemen, bureaucracy, and the insane premiums that come with them. Between our 2 families, it's easily saving us over $2,000 a month. That's real money back in our pockets. And right now, if you use the link in the description, you'll pay only $44 a month for the first 3 months. That's $1,200 in extra savings just for getting started. If you're already taking your health seriously, why keep paying high premiums for others who aren't? The link is in the description. It's one of the easiest financial decisions you'll make.